My name is Lucinda Grace Rowley, and I am 76 years old. I've lived most of my life in silence. A silence so thick, so painful, you could choke on it. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that buries truth under shame. I was born in a dusty little town in Indiana. My father died when I was just 3. My mother remarried when I was 7, and that's when my childhood ended. His name was Gerald. To the world, he was a kind, church-going man. But behind closed doors, he ruled our house with fear. Not fists. Not bruises. Just humiliation. Slow, sharp, deliberate. And the worst part? My mother let him. Every time he made me feel small, she stood in the doorway and said nothing. Not when he made me undress as punishment for disobedience. Not when he pointed at my reflection and told me I was worthless. Not even when he made me watch, again and again, replays of my lowest moments, recorded like trophies on a screen he controlled. I grew up convinced that love meant pain and silence. So I stayed silent. I married young. I raised my daughter, Rachel, with everything I never had: warmth, protection, love. But trauma has a way of shaping your shadow. You carry it into every room, every relationship, every mistake. I thought I had escaped the darkness when Gerald died. And when my mother finally passed, I thought the silence would too. I was wrong. Because last week, at the age of 76, I found out my daughter, Rachel, had been showing her husband those same old recordings. Recordings I thought were long gone. Recordings of me, broken. I walked in on them laughing. Laughing. Rachel didn't flinch. "Why are you upset, Mom? You always said you wanted us to remember where we came from." I left their house that night with nothing but my purse and my coat. It was raining. They didn't stop me. And for the first time in 70 years, I didn't cry. I sat on a bench at the edge of the park, water dripping from my sleeves, and I whispered to myself, I am not their shame anymore. That was the moment I decided to speak. Not with tears. Not with rage. But with truth. Because silence never protected me. And now, it was going to free me. I pulled a soggy notebook from my purse and began writing the first page of my story. The story they tried to erase. And they have no idea that the next time they see me will be the day their world changes forever. If this opening shook you, don't let the story stop here. Like this video if you believe no one is too old to reclaim their voice. Comment below. Have you ever kept silent for the sake of others? It's time to speak. Subscribe to Buried Truth for real stories that rise from the ashes. Share this with someone who needs to hear. Your story matters. Your silence doesn't have to be permanent. I didn't sleep that night. The rain soaked through my coat, my shoes, and my memories. I sat on that park bench until morning light crept over the trees, warming my frozen fingers just enough to move again. That notebook, cheap, spiral-bound, pages swollen from moisture, held the first truth I'd ever told without fear. Just 10 sentences scribbled in ink, shaky from cold and anger. But it was mine. My first page of freedom. By 7 a.m., I was on a bus out of town. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell anyone. I rode in silence until we reached a small town 2 counties away. A place called Havenwood. I had read about it once in a magazine at the laundromat, a town that prided itself on community centers, senior advocacy, and healing gardens. I didn't want a handout. I wanted a place to breathe. I checked into a modest motel. The woman at the front desk, B, was in her 60s, with thick glasses and a voice like a warm blanket. She looked at me with curious eyes. "Passing through?" "No," I said, trying to remember who I am. She didn't press. She handed me the key. That first week, I kept to myself. I walked every day. I wrote in my notebook every night. I watched families laughing in parks and older couples dancing on patios to music only they could hear. I envied them, but I didn't hate them, because hate was what had kept me quiet all these years. And I was done with that. By the second week, I walked into the Havenwood Women's Center. It wasn't a fancy building, just a converted church space with folding chairs and coffee that tasted like tap water. But it was full of women. Women like me. Women with stories that rattled when they breathed. I listened for 3 sessions before I ever spoke. And when I did, the room went silent. I told them about Gerald. I told them about my mother. And then, I told them about Rachel.
The room didn't gasp.
It nodded, because pain has a language, and every woman there was fluent. That day, the director, a strong, soft-spoken woman named June, took my hand. "You don't have to stay broken, Lucinda," she said.
You've already survived.
"Now it's time to rise." That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't just write in private. I would publish my story, my truth, with names, with details, with everything. I wasn't scared of what it would do to Rachel. I was more afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent any longer. So I opened a laptop at the town library, typed the first line. "My name is Lucinda Rowley. I was raised by silence, shamed by cruelty, and now, at 76, I'm here to burn every lie down." The blog went live at midnight. I didn't sleep. I watched the screen glow in the motel room, heart racing with every paragraph I published. I titled it, "Silence Raised Me." By morning, the post had 4 views. By evening, it had over 3,000. And by the end of the week, everything changed. Emails started pouring in, from women in retirement homes, from daughters who were survivors, from grown men who remembered their mothers being shamed in their own homes. But there was one message I couldn't ignore. It came from a woman named Janice Clemens, a producer for a national podcast that focused on elder justice and intergenerational trauma. She'd read my blog, and she wanted to interview me. I stared at the email for hours. Me? Speak out loud? Into a microphone? I had written my truth, but I hadn't spoken it, and part of me was still scared. I forwarded the message to June, the Women's Center director. She called me immediately. "You must do this," she said. "Not for fame. Not for them. For every woman who needs to hear your voice to find hers."
So I said yes.
The day of the recording, I wore a blue sweater and a pin that belonged to my grandmother. I sat in a quiet room at the community center, headphones on, a mic in front of me. And when the host said, "Lucinda, are you ready?" I didn't hesitate. I told it all. Gerald's punishments. My mother's silence. Rachel's betrayal. The footage I never agreed to. The shame I carried for decades. By the end of the interview, the producer was in tears. "Your voice," she said, "is going to set people free." And it did. The episode went viral. Millions listened. And then Rachel heard it. I didn't need to guess. I could feel it in the air. The stillness before a storm. 2 days later, she showed up in Havenwood. She found the Women's Center. She found me. She stood outside as I left the Thursday night support group, her arms crossed, eyes red. "You really aired our dirty laundry?" she snapped. I didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, you soiled it. I just stopped washing it for you." Her lip trembled. "You ruined my reputation." I stepped closer.
Calm. Cold.
"You filmed me. You laughed at me. You made me believe I was still the girl they broke. I didn't ruin your reputation, you did. And now the world just knows it." She shook her head. "You'll regret this." "No," I said softly. "I regret every moment I spent protecting the monster instead of the girl." She walked away, and I didn't look back. If this chapter lit a fire in you, don't let it burn alone. Like this video if you believe truth is louder than shame. Comment below, what would you say to someone who tried to silence you? Subscribe to Buried Truth for real stories of survival that refuse to be forgotten. Share this with someone who needs to know. Your story is power. Use it. 2 weeks passed since Rachel confronted me. She didn't call,
Didn't write.
and I didn't chase her. Because for the first time in my life, I had no desire to be needed by someone who only saw me as convenient when I was voiceless. Instead, I focused on healing. I started leading a small writing circle at the Havenwood Women's Center. Every Thursday, a group of women, most over 60, gathered with pens and notebooks to write what they were never allowed to say. We called ourselves the Unsilenced. Each week, We read stories of pain, betrayal, survival, and strength. No one judged. No one interrupted. We cried. We laughed. We listened. One woman, Sandra, wrote a piece titled, "My husband called me his maid until I sold the house he never paid for." Another, June herself, finally shared her story of fleeing a man who cut up her poetry journals because no one wants to hear old women cry. We proved him wrong. But there was something else brewing beneath the surface of my new life. Emails, letters, messages, all from women begging for a place like Havenwood in their own town. Some wanted help escaping abusive caretakers. Some just wanted a room where they could exist without being mocked for their age or silence. And that's when the idea hit me. Golden Acres wasn't just a place. It could be a model. A blueprint for every woman who had ever been told she was too old to matter. So I wrote a proposal, a detailed plan to expand our Havenwood program into a national framework. Shelters for aging survivors, support groups for elder abuse victims, partnerships with senior centers, churches, and hospitals. I called it the Unsilenced Network. The first version was clunky, but June helped me revise it. And then the women from our group, those who once could barely speak their own truths, stood with me at a town council meeting and told the city why we needed it. When we finished, the room rose to their feet. We were heard, but not everyone clapped. The following day, I received a formal cease and desist letter from Rachel's attorney. She claimed I had defamed her character publicly and personally, and that if I didn't remove her name from my stories, she would pursue a lawsuit. I laughed when I read it, because what Rachel didn't realize was that I had never once used her name in the blog, on the podcast, or in my speeches. I never needed to. The guilt did the naming for her. Nathaniel helped me draft a response. It reads simply, "Dear Rachel, I never set out to destroy your name. I set out to reclaim mine. That's what terrifies you. I'm not afraid anymore. And no legal paper can undo the truth. Sincerely, Lucinda Rowley." I signed it, sealed it. Then I wrote another blog post. This one was called, "The Day My Abuser Threatened Me One Last Time." And it became the most shared piece I'd ever written. Because people weren't just reading. They were waking up. The ripple turned into a wave. After that blog post, my inbox overflowed, not with threats, but with thank yous. From women in assisted living homes whose sons had cut off their access to bank accounts. From grandmothers whose daughters rolled their eyes whenever they asked for help. From survivors in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, who had never spoken a word of what they endured. It hit me all at once. They weren't silent because they were weak. They were silent because the world never thought to ask. That was about to change. One morning, Nathaniel called me. He sounded breathless. "Lucinda, sit down," he said. "CBS wants to feature your story." I blinked. CBS? Television CBS. They saw the podcast. They saw your blog. They want to film a segment on elder abuse awareness. You'd be the centerpiece. My stomach flipped. I had told my truth into a mic. But television? A camera? Would I be ready? "I'll do it," I said, steady. "If it means no one else has to hide like I did." 2 weeks later, they arrived. A full crew. Bright lights. A woman named Sheila, the reporter, kind and professional. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like someone worth listening to. They filmed in the Havenwood Community Garden. I wore a lavender blouse and a silver brooch from my late aunt, someone who had also lived in fear until her final breath. I spoke for her. For all of them. We talked about Gerald. We talked about Rachel. We talked about silence, shame, and how I built my life back from nothing but a motel room and a soaked notebook. When it aired, everything changed. I was invited to speak at colleges, senior centers, women's prisons. I met senators. I met survivors. I met myself again. And then, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to. "Lucinda," the voice cracked. "It's me, your niece. Lila." My heart stopped. Lila was the daughter of my half-brother. I hadn't seen her in over 30 years. She was barely 20 when we last spoke. Now she was, what, 50? I saw the segment. I had no idea, she whispered. Grandpa. Gerald, he did that to you. I closed my eyes. Yes. She sniffled. I'm so sorry. I believed everything they said. That you were dramatic. Hysterical. That you'd lost your mind. You were just a child, I said. They made sure you never heard the truth. I want to come see you, she said. Please. Let me make this right. We met a week later at a diner in a nearby town. She looked like my brother. Same crooked smile, same nervous fingers tapping her glass. She reached across the table. I'm proud of you, she said. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words. After she left, I sat there alone for a long while, staring at the sunlight dancing on my coffee spoon. And I thought, if one person can come back, maybe more can too. But just as hope bloomed, darkness returned. That night, someone broke into my motel room. Nothing was stolen, but my blog draft files were opened. The notebooks I kept in a drawer were flipped through. My framed photo of my father was shattered on the floor. They wanted me to feel watched. They wanted to scare me silent again. I picked up the frame. I whispered, not this time. If you felt chills reading this chapter, let the world know. Like this video if you believe truth will always outlive fear. Comment below. Have you ever been threatened for telling the truth? Subscribe to Buried Truth for real stories that shatter silence and shame. The break-in shook me. Not because I feared what they'd do, but because I recognized what it meant. This wasn't just someone trying to scare me. This was someone trying to erase the trail I'd built. One tear, one truth, one sentence at a time. And I had a gut feeling it wasn't random. It was Rachel. Or someone close to her. She had everything to lose now. Reputation, money, sympathy. But what she didn't realize was that I no longer needed to hide in silence. I had community. I had press. I had proof. So I filed a police report, gave them the motel's surveillance footage. The officer was kind but skeptical. You sure you don't want to just move somewhere safer, ma'am? He asked. I looked him square in the face. I've already moved. I'm not moving backward. That same day, I met with June and Nathaniel. We needed more security. Not just for me, for all the women who were coming forward because of the unsilenced network. So we used part of our grant fund to install cameras around the center. We updated passwords, encrypted files, backed up everything. And then I did something I never imagined I'd do. I bought land. Yes, me, Lucinda Rowley, age 76, who once begged for a warm cot and hot soup, bought land. It was a small but beautiful plot on the edge of Havenwood, nestled beside a slow river with wildflowers and pine trees. A sanctuary. I called it the Unsilenced Grounds. It would be a retreat, a place where women who had lived too long in pain could come and exhale. Construction began 2 months later. Volunteers showed up from all over the county, carpenters, nurses, landscapers, even a few college students from nearby campuses. But just as the first building was being framed, another storm rolled in. Rachel filed a civil suit. She accused me of slander, emotional distress, and intentionally damaging her livelihood. Her husband, my son-in-law, attached financial documents claiming I had caused them to lose over $200,000 in business and endorsements. I wanted to laugh. They had stolen my life for decades. And now they were offended I reclaimed it? Nathaniel was furious. We'll fight this. They don't have a leg to stand on. But I knew something deeper. This wasn't about court. This was about power. They thought dragging me back into legal chaos would break me. But I'd already been broken. Now I was rebuilt. I wrote another blog post that night, titled, "They Sued Me for Surviving." It hit 1 million views in under 48 hours. Local news picked it up. Then state media. Then a national elder justice organization reached out, offering to cover my legal fees if the case went to trial. But before we even stepped into a courtroom, their attorney withdrew. Turns out, Gerald's past, the abuse, the cover-ups, the decades of manipulation, had started surfacing. Other women came forward. Other victims. Some even from Rachel's childhood church. Suddenly, She was the one in hiding. The lawsuit was dropped. And I was just getting started. Clapperboard if you believe silence is no longer an option. Make your voice count. Thumbs up like this video if Lucinda's fight reminds you of someone who refused to back down. Speech balloon comment. What would you build if fear didn't hold the hammer? Bell subscribe to Buried Truth for more powerful stories of healing and revenge. Loudspeakers share this video and remind the world, survivors don't just survive, they rise. The lawsuit's collapse wasn't the end. It was the beginning. That year, we opened the first building on the unsilenced grounds. It had no golden plaque, no velvet ribbon. Just a wooden sign above the porch that read, "Come as you are." Inside were rocking chairs, bookshelves, a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon, and bedrooms with quilts donated from survivors across the country. Every woman who stepped through those doors brought a story, some bruised, some buried, some burning. But none of them left unseen. On opening day, I stood on the porch with June and Nathaniel beside me, and over 150 women in lawn chairs below. Many of them wore lavender, the color we'd chosen for resilience. I cleared my throat. I spent most of my life being quiet, I said, because people told me my voice was too much, or not enough, or too late.
Pause.
But silence never protected me. It protected them. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They nodded. They knew. Later that afternoon, I walked alone behind the building to the flower path we'd planted. Wild violets. My mother's favorite. I forgave her there, not because she asked, but because I deserved peace. As the sun dipped, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Lila, my niece. She held a small wrapped box. Inside was an old cassette tape. "I found this in Grandma's attic," she said. "It's labeled Lucy's Song. I think it's you." I nearly dropped it. I hadn't heard that nickname in decades. Lila brought a player the next day. We sat in the garden with a few of the women. I pressed play. Static. Then a gentle guitar. And my mother's voice.
Soft.
Unsteady. Singing a lullaby she used to hum when I was a child, before Gerald. Before silence. Everyone listened. And for the first time, I wept in front of strangers without shame. That night, I wrote one last blog entry. Titled, "My Voice Was a Whisper Once. Now it's a bell tower." And I ended it with this. If you are reading this and you're scared, if you are reading this and you've been hurt, if you are reading this and you've been told to stay quiet,
come.
There's a room for you here. With lavender walls and open windows. We'll keep the light on. If Lucinda's story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video if you believe healing is louder than hate. Share in the comments what moment gave you your voice back. Subscribe to Buried Truth for more real, raw, and redemptive stories. Share this video with someone who thinks it's too late. Tell them it's not. The morning of my 80th birthday, I woke up to birdsong and a handwritten note slipped under my door. It was from one of the new women at the unsilenced grounds. Her name was Bernice, 72, a retired nurse who had once been locked in her basement by her own son. Her note read, "You made it possible for me to breathe again. Today, I pray you feel the love you gave the rest of us." I pressed it to my chest, eyes full. 80. A number I never thought I'd reach. Not because of age, but because for so long I'd lived like I didn't matter enough to keep living. But here I was.
Alive.
Standing. Leading. That afternoon, a celebration was held in my honor. Nothing lavish. Just a picnic on the front lawn with music, storytelling, and a banner stitched with names of women who had reclaimed their power through the center. As I stepped out onto the porch, they clapped. Some cried. And then I saw her, Rachel, standing far off behind the last row of chairs. Alone. No husband. No entourage. Just her. She wore sunglasses, but I knew those eyes. Ashamed.
Torn.
Hollow. For a split second, our gazes locked. I expected rage, bitterness, or even smugness. But all I saw was someone who finally realized what she had lost. She left without a word. I didn't need one. Because forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't need applause. That night, I sat with Nathaniel, June, Lila, and a dozen other women on the porch. Fireflies glowed in the distance, and someone passed around slices of cherry pie. Nathaniel raised a toast to Lucinda Rowley, the bell tower. They all laughed, and I did too. And then I stood. There was a time, I said softly, when I believed the worst thing in life was being abused.
Pause.
But it wasn't. The worst thing was being unbelieved. Silent nods rippled through the group. And yet, I continued, the greatest revenge wasn't court, or exposés, or even Rachel's shame. The greatest revenge was this. I opened my arms to the women seated before me, to the land,
To the lights.
to the laughter, living long enough to become the woman I was never allowed to be. Applause didn't matter, because this time I wasn't performing. I was existing, freely, fully, loudly. The next week, the Unsilenced Network received a federal grant to expand to 5 more states. The land next to ours was donated by a local farmer, an old man whose mother had also once been silenced. And I returned to the motel room where it all began. Room 6B. It hadn't changed much. Same flickering bulb. Same dusty mirror. But this time, I stood in front of that mirror proud. Old skin. Bent spine. Wrinkled eyes. But a gaze steady and unafraid. I whispered, "You did it." I tucked the final copy of my memoir into the drawer. The title? Whispers Turned Bell Towers. Then I walked outside, got in my car, and drove back home to the grounds, where 16 more women were arriving by sundown. Each one stepping into a new story. Each one no longer afraid of her own voice. If this story gave you hope, don't scroll past. Like this video if you believe every woman deserves to be heard, even at 80. Comment below, who silenced you? And how will you rise? Subscribe to Buried Truth for more stories that start with pain, but end with power. Share this video with someone who thinks they're too old to start again. Remind them, you're just getting started. It had been nearly a year since the Unsilenced Grounds opened its doors. By then, over 300 women had passed through, each with a story, each with a scar, each with something she thought she'd buried for good. But none of them left the same. We held bonfire nights, storytelling circles, healing workshops, and even silent walks through the Pine Trail where many had come face to face with their own forgotten voices. And yet, something still tugged at me deep inside. I hadn't gone back. Not to the house. Not to Gerald's house. The same house I had fled at 19. The same house where the walls held screams no one believed. Where my mother looked away. Where my stepfather used his belt and his Bible to destroy anything that sparkled inside me. That house still stood. And one October morning, I drove there. Alone.
I didn't tell Nathaniel. Or June.
Or Lila. I just drove 3 hours north until the cracked wooden fence came into view. It was now abandoned.
Covered in ivy.
Windows boarded. The paint chipped away like old secrets peeling under time's breath. I stood outside the rusted gate for a long time. Then I walked in. The door creaked like it remembered me. The living room smelled of rot and regret. But in the corner, still standing, was that old piano. The one my mother used to play when she wasn't sad. Before Gerald married her. Before everything went dark. I ran my hand across its dusty keys. Then, with fingers trembling, I pressed a note. It echoed. Then another. And another. Until the room filled with the same song from the cassette tape, Lucy's song. This time, I didn't cry. I sang. Out loud. For the broken girl I once was. For the women who never made it out. For my mother, who died before she could say she was sorry. And when I was done, I whispered into the silence. I win. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A tiny, burnt edge of a notebook beneath the floorboard. My old journal. The one I had hidden under the floor in the room where I used to sleep. I reached for it. And there it was. The final piece. A drawing I made at 13. It showed a girl with wings, bursting through a cage made of hands. Underneath, I had written one sentence. One day, I will fly so loudly The sky will remember my name. I took it with me. The next week, I stood on a stage at a National Women's Summit in Washington, D.C. Thousands were watching. I wore a sky blue dress, the color of hope. And I told them everything. The house, the hurt, the healing, the land, the grounds. When I finished, they didn't clap. They stood.
They wept.
They reached for each other. And I knew I was no longer alone. Not ever again. That night, back at the unsilenced grounds, I climbed the little tower we'd built from reclaimed wood. And for the first time in my life, I rang the bell. It echoed through the trees.
Loud. Clear.
Unapologetic. And in that moment, I felt the hands of every woman who had ever been silenced resting gently on my shoulders, lifting me, saying, "You did it, Lucinda. You turned your pain into a place, your shame into a sanctuary, your whisper into a bell tower. If this final chapter moved you to tears, let it be the start of something real. Like this video to honor Lucinda and every woman who refused to stay silent. Comment below. I will ring the bell. Subscribe to Buried Truth for more stories that empower, heal, and awaken. Share this video and tell the world. No voice is too old. No story is too late.